under the Articles of Confederation. So they wanted to make it perfect or complete for a more effective government. Articles were not considered to be an effective government. There was limitations, and they were trying to fix those limitations. To establish justice, fiduciary idea of impartiality. And justice had been impaired at times in individual states under the Articles. Domestic tranquility. And it was between the states and social classes. And again, domestic tranquility then leads to a more effective government. Common defense. A weakness of Congress under the Articles. This was related to this is related to the core values of both effectiveness and impartiality. Promote the general welfare as opposed to individual welfares or the interests of regions. So this was a form of the public, or actually increasing the public trust, because it was trying to address problems that had occurred under the Articles between states.
Wouldn't you say that the current, last Congress took this general welfare and decided that it was a welfare statecraft,
Right.
as opposed to general welfare for raising taxes and providing for the ability to have money to defend?
And that kind of gets back to the core values of liberty. When you're talking about liberty within our nation, within the Constitution, when you start focusing on special interest groups, and then you're taking away the liberties of one group and giving them to the other group, you suddenly are creating partiality as opposed to impartiality. Our founders wanted this document to last forever. I mean, if possible, which is incredible. But they thought it would last the test of time. Part of the reason why we have our Article 5 amendment process is because they knew that the document would have to be tweaked from time to time as situations changed over time, or errors were found in the original structure of the document. When you think about, I don't know if you heard about this, but when Egypt was going through their writing, there was a gentleman who was rewriting their constitution. One individual that was rewriting their constitution. I mean, goodness. I mean, it's difficult in our country just to do an amendment. This guy was rewriting the Egyptian constitution. I mean, there are governments, like Italy, that fall apart. They last for a couple of years and they fall apart. Our government, we've been able to have a document, a founding document that's lasted all these years. It's not absolutely perfect, but goodness, it's certainly been much more stable a document than anything else the world has seen. So things that are common errors. For example, among lay people, that would be all of us, is that you can just read the Constitution without interpretation. Of course, there are words that look normal to us that had slightly different meanings in the 18th century. So that's one area that you can get tripped up on. We're going to get a little further into this, but goodness, there's all kinds of techniques of construction for writing a legal document that were used. There's all kinds of Latin phrases that kind of define what these elements of construction actually meant, what they were used for. An opposite error is when you have somebody that is interpreting the Constitution using kind of like their 21st century eyeballs, as opposed to looking at it through the lens of the 18th century. So that's an important thing to consider that you can get tripped up on. Trying to find the intent of the makers or the spirit of the document is what we're trying to do. And that's one thing that our book really helps us with. We're trying to get the original understanding of what the Constitution meant to the ratifiers. And so, in other words, going back and reading, for example, like the Federalist Papers and the ratification debates helps us get that window into the thinking of those people in the 18th century. But we also had to put ourselves into a mindset of the way people behaved back then and the way they thought and the kind of education that they had, the kinds of law books that they read. All those things influenced the development of the Constitution. Many of the states, once they were presented with the arguments of the Federalists, they then decided to go ahead and ratify the Constitution, which is very strong evidence that the Federalist Papers, for example, really give you a good insight into what the framers and ratifiers thought the Constitution meant. When considering the intent of the makers, you have to think in terms of the founding generations. And again, you know, those core values were driving them, that were underlying the development of the Constitution. Being able to read things like Samuel Johnson's dictionary to help you understand what words meant in the 18th century is extremely important. This goes beyond what most of you are going to want to do, but to really understand the full meaning of the Constitution and what our founders and framers were trying to accomplish. Understanding how legal documents were written during that period is extremely important. Latin, they used a lot of Latin back then. And a lot of these elements of construction were written in Latin. They were big fans of history. They understood Greek, Roman, British history. These are all influences on the Constitution. These are some of the terms that are used when you're talking about how the Constitution is constructed. They use these concise maxims, they're called, or canons of construction, or rules of construction. Over 90% of these were written in Latin. And they're even still used today by lawyers when they're writing legal briefs. It's interesting because it's also when you're talking about the Constitution, it's a logical document. So for example, courts often talk about words should signify something. They should be understood to have force. In other words, when somebody's writing a legal document, they're writing it, they're using words that have meaning, that are specific. You know, without those words, the document is lessened or it doesn't have the authority. So the choice of words is extremely important. For example, provide for the general welfare. We talked about that a moment ago. The inclusion of other powers tells you that general welfare isn't the only thing that should be determined when you're talking about the power structure of Congress. So in other words, you can't assume that the general welfare gives Congress a free ticket to do everything because there's all these other enumerated powers. So in other words, the inclusion of those other powers tells you that the one power, general welfare, isn't all inclusive.
The word that just there, provide for the general welfare, the word provide, when you first showed the preamble, it said promote.
I'm trying to remember.
Promote the general welfare.
Yeah. So,
which is,
I actually might have made a mistake when I was typing this up. I apologize. Go back to original sources. And I apologize for any spelling errors.
No, it says provide for the common welfare.
Is it provide?
Provide for the common
Okay, provide for the
common
common.
deference, promote the general welfare.
Or promote the general welfare. Okay, so it's probably my mistake, my typing mistake. I apologize. So, rules of construction. you need to understand the intent behind the document. So for example, if I'm going to write a will, last will and testament, it's going to, the design